Hello, in this tutorial we're going to continue on with our enemy class and dive deep into methods. So here we have a special constructor, and we know that this is a constructor because it's the same name as the class itself. And as a review, we've got all of our attributes and a few accessors and a modifier here. And we earlier created this public void do something just to demonstrate that we could define methods. I'm going to get rid of that because we actually want to put legitimate methods inside of our class now. So the first one that I want to do is public override, and then let's define the toString function. Okay, so toString is defined on all objects of all classes, which is why I need to use this override function, this override keyword, because what it's going to do is say, hey, I know that the toString function is acting as a placeholder earlier up in my class hierarchy in the generic object class. But what I want to do now is actually define what it means for this object to render itself as a string. Okay, so you'll notice that the return type is string and the function name or the method name is called toString. So we're going to just simply return a string of what this thing should look like if we wanted to render it as a string. So let's say the enemy's name plus has health equal to the health property plus and does, let's call it the strength, and does this much damage and is at position X and position Y, and that'll finish it off. So we're going to go through and just render a string that concatenates all of these different properties together and returns it from this function. Okay, so now back in our main, since we're trying to write this thing out to the screen, it's going to implicitly invoke that toString function and then render it out. So let's run it. And now you can see that we have our two enemies. No name enemy has health 100 and does 10 damage and is at position 0, 0. And E2 is the exact same thing because our constructor is what's called, and we haven't ever modified this. So let's go into our enemy class and define another constructor. Public enemy. And now I'm going to pass it some parameters here. So I'll define two different functions that have the same name but have different parameter lists. And this is called overloading, and it's very useful in particular for the constructor because it's going to allow me to instantiate enemy objects and optionally pass parameters to it. So the first thing I want to do is pass it, let's say, the name. We'll call that string n as the parameter. And the next thing I need to take in is the health, and then the attack strength. Call that attack, and then position X, and then position Y. Okay, so I'm taking in these 5 values as parameters, and I need to do the same kind of code that I had here in my constructor that we had previously defined, but now instead of using these defaults, I'm going to go with these attributes, or these properties, these parameters that I'm taking in. Okay, so we'll use HP and set hit point to be HP. Whatever you pass in the attack parameter, we'll use for the attack strength, and pos X and pos Y for the position X and the position Y respectively, and finally the name will be N. Okay, so now I've defined two constructors, one which takes in no parameters and one which takes in these 5. And here in main, instead of just creating E1 and E2 with no parameters, right, notice that I've got two different definitions of the enemy constructor. One, as we had previously done, that has no parameters, and then this one that takes in 5. So let's call this a lizard man, and his hit points, let's say, is 50, and his attack strength is 20. It's pretty strong, let's say, and he is at position 5 and -6. Okay, now if we run this, we're going to get a different output for the different enemies. The first one, E1, still says no name enemy has health 100 and does 10 damage and is at position 0, 0, because that was what that default constructor set us up with. Okay, but the second enemy, E2, is going to display the different name and health and damage and position information because that's what we passed in. So this gives you a general idea of how to define different constructors that take in different parameters, and also how to do this override of the toString function. But we're not limited to just going with constructors and toString. We could also tell the enemy to move. So let's create a public method. It's not going to return anything, so I'll have its return type as void, and then we'll have the move function. There's a couple of different ways of doing this. We could pass it a new x and a new y and have it move to that, right? So I could new x and new y, or I could have it move randomly or anything like that. So let's just take in this new x and this new y and set the position x to be the new x and the position y to be the new y. And we'll be able to move our enemy around now by invoking this new method, this move method. So let's go in here into, after I've printed them out, I could say E2 dot, and the dot operator is going to have me do some work on this. You'll notice that our public accessors, health, name, and strength show up here, and I also have our toString function, but we also have our move function. So let's invoke move and tell this lizard to move to position 3, 4. So he was at position 5, -3, and now he's moving to position 3, 4. And let's print these things out again after they've moved. So let's run this. And you'll see that the first two output lines, no name is at position, and lizardman is at such and such position. And then we reprint them out. No name hasn't moved at all. It's still at position 0, 0, but now the lizardman is at position 3, 4. So that should show you how easy it is to define new methods inside of a class. Just give it a name and parameter list and a return type and all the code that you want to have run, just as we did with methods before. But now this method is able to manipulate and edit the attributes that we have here inside of our class. And in order to invoke and make that function run and do its thing, we just use the dot operator on the object that we want to have do the work, and then that object will go off and do whatever the code is there. And that's how easy it is to define new methods with parameters inside of a class.